So the Nothing Phone 3A and 3A Pro, still absolutely two of my favourite mid-range smartphones of 2025. Think of them as the chicken and mushroom and steak bakes of the mobile world. Steak bake obviously top tier, but I'm more than happy with a bit of the chicken and mushroom. But now, 6 months on, they've suddenly been joined by a third member, the Nothing Phone 3A Lite. And as the name heavily suggests, this is an even cheaper bugger costing just £249. And that's right on the borders of Nothing's even more budget-friendly CMF branded phones. But the Nothing Phone 3A Lite is likely to only hit regions where CMF blowers aren't readily available. Otherwise it would just be Nothing competing with nothing. Anyway, let's whip it out the box, see what you get, and then magically prance our way into the future several days during which I'll be using the Nothing Phone 3A Lite as my full-time smartphone. So you can see what I reckon of the gaming experience, the camera chops, all that good stuff. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do poke subscribe, ding that old notifications bell. Cheers! So as you can see, I've got the white model. Rip the bugger open. So in the box we've got a lovely wee welcome message from Carl & Co, which is actually the exact same welcome message that they did for the 3A and the 3A Pro. Couldn't even be bothered to write a new one. Clearly they're just far too busy designing the perfect smartphone for YouTube f***wits like me. And in here you've got a protective condom case for your Nothing Phone 3A Lite. Always gratifying to see. You've also got your Nothing Phone 3A Lite, naturally. You got your classy wee transparent SIM pokey pin thing. And you've got your Type-C to Type-C USB charging cable. And that's everything bunged in the box with that Phone 3A Lite. Alright, so it's 5 days later. Welcome to the future, everybody. Bad news, everything is still mostly bollocks. Still got my SIM slipped inside the Nothing Phone 3A Lite. It hasn't pissed me off so much I've hid it in the sea or anything. Let's start with the design. And the Nothing Phone 3A Lite is yet another 6.77 incher, which actually feels a wee bit bigger than that thanks to the fairly chunky bezels surrounding that display, but at least they're reasonably symmetrical. And this phone isn't an absolute heifer, weighing just 199 grams. Now Nothing has slapped a good bit of Panda glass front and back on the Phone 3A Lite. And you got the same aluminium frame with a matte finish, which is good because it doesn't get all smudgy and greasy and grimy when you're playing around with it. And then around back you've got that transparent back again, just like the Phone 3A and 3A Pro. But that's pretty much all they do have in common. The design actually changes up quite a bit throughout the series. My favourite is still the original 3A. It's again sort of mostly symmetrical with a dinky wee camera bump and this rather lush blue finish, which for some reason you simply do not get with the others. Sadly, the Nothing Phone 3A Lite only comes in black or white. Sad times. And of course, with the camera lenses seemingly just sort of randomly shunted away into the corner like so, the Nothing Phone 3A Lite is actually more reminiscent of the Nothing Phone 3, which of course sports one of the most maligned designs of 2025. There are some people online who do like it. You have to search a bit to find them. Opinions typically range from, oh, that's a bit different, all the way up to, oh my god, I hope the Nothing designers get mega AIDS. Certainly if you start looking on the likes of Reddit. And the Nothing Phone 3A Lite looks pretty similar, just a bit more bland, I guess, not quite as much going on. The most common remark I had was it kind of looks like something's missing, which, yeah, it's hard to argue with that. And the thing that's really missing, of course, is the triple Glyph Lighten setup that was slapped around back on the Nothing Phone 3A and Pro. Now sadly, this has been ripped right out for the Nothing Phone 3A Lite and replaced with, this. It's less of a disco extravaganza and more like a firefly's flatulence. Anyway, more on that fun later. Now you do once again get an IP rating with the Nothing Phone 3A Lite, but it is IP54 rather than 64 like the regular 3A, so slightly less dust resistant and still merely splash resistant as opposed to full-on water resistant. Now, when you want to have a bit of a play with your Nothing Phone 3A Lite, you've got an in-display optical fingerprint sensor pushed away towards the bottom end of the display to unlock it. I would have preferred slightly more up the screen in a more natural, comfortable position, but the actual sensor itself is absolutely fine. Usually does the job as long as your hands aren't too damp. And then once you unlock this bugger, you're straight into a lovely bit of NothingOS 3.5 launcher action, which is sadly built on top of Android 15, so it's not the latest, freshest Android 16 just yet. That's apparently coming in the first half of 2026, which is quite a wide window. Like, is it going to come sort of January, February time, or are we waiting until literally bloody summertime to finally get it? And while Nothing does offer 6 full years of security patching for the Nothing Phone 3A Lite, which is pretty bloody good for a budget smartphone, you do only get the 3 guaranteed Android OS updates, which means it only goes as far as Android 18, because we're still waiting on 16. And you've got the same storage options as the regular 3A, so 128 gigs or 256 gigs, which, as you can see, still got a ways to fill that one up. And as a bit of a bonus, on the back end of that SIM tray, you can either slip in a second SIM, otherwise you can slap in a micro SD memory card to expand that storage up to a further 2 terabytes. However, while the Nothing Phone 3A Lite offers support for 2 physical SIMs, there is bugger all support for eSIMs, which is particularly bad news if you do a lot of traveling, because they're so easy to slap on there. Make sure that when you land, you've got full internet access. But hey, NothingOS is still a cracker, still mostly sort of stock Android. You've got your discovery feed, you've got your apps tray, of course, which can be AI sorted. And you've got your control center and notifications panel, still one thing. And when you first set up your smartphone, you can choose to go with this sort of stylized dot matrixy shenanigans, otherwise you can choose a stock Android vibe instead. You've got all the features you'd hope to find slapped on here, the likes of an always on display, because your usual general customization, you can change the icon packs, the layout, mess around with the lock screen, etc. The only real disappointment comes with, of course, the Glyph interface, which is, of course, now just a single bloody flashing LED down in that bottom corner. So you do still get a couple of features like flip to Glyph. So just flip the phone over, you'll see the bottom corner there flashes once just to indicate flip to Glyph is active. And you've got that essential notifications feature again, so you can either have the Nothing Phone 3A Lite flash whenever any kind of notification pops through, or just essential notifications, so from the apps or the contacts that you deem worthy of disturbing your peace. You can also choose from a small variety of notification flashes and ringtones, which, to be fair, pretty limited when you just got a single tiny LED around back. And that is it, unfortunately, here on the 3A Lite. Bugger all other Glyph features supported, so no timer, third-party integration, etc., because it just wouldn't work. However, the essential space is in full swing here on the Nothing Phone 3A Lite. You do get that essential key secreted on the right edge below the power button. Not massively differentiated from the power button, has to be said. Although thankfully I never accidentally hit it when aiming for the power button, or just when fumbling the phone out of my pocket, etc. And yeah, this works in exactly the same way as always. A quick tap and it will capture whatever is on the screen on the Nothing Phone 3A Lite at the time. You can then add a little note, either a written note or a voice note, or alternatively, if you press and hold that key, it will start to record at the same time. Visit this mezcal bar next week in Mexico City. And then you can double tap the essential key in order to zip right into the essential space. And in here you can access everything that you've saved so far. I've been storing away a load of information about Mexico City, which I'll be visiting in a couple of days. As you can see, you can set little reminders on stuff that you want to do, which are completely customizable. And every time you save a screenshot, it will basically rip all of the information out of that screenshot and then store it away. So for instance here, you can see how much it costs to get into this castle, where it is in good old Google Maps. Boom, right there apparently. So similar vibe to pixel screenshots and Mindspace in ColorOS and OxygenOS, for instance. It's not quite as good in that you can't search as quickly and easily for information that you've saved compared with those others. And also slightly annoying that you can't remap that essential key to anything else if you want to. Now, despite costing less, the Nothing Phone 3A Lite at least seems to rock the same 6.77-inch AMOLED display as its 3A siblings. You've once again got a Full HD Plus resolution, that's 2392 by 1080 pixels. So visuals aren't the absolute crispiest, but you know, it's not too bad, absolutely fine for just browsing your photo collection, doing a little bit of picture editing if you want to on the fly, and of course kicking back with a bit of Netflix, even though there is bugger all HDR streaming support here. Contrast is still respectable, you can slightly tweak the colours to a small degree, it doesn't really make a huge amount of difference flipping between Alive and Standard. This display is certainly supremely bright enough to comfortably use outdoors on a sunny day, though also generally a bit too bright in the mornings when I first wake up, I find.
Supports 120Hz refresh rate, so nice and smooth, and you've also got 2160Hz PWM dimming, which is great news if you are sensitive to that OLED flicker. But bad news on the audio front, because it is a crappy mono speaker setup. It is only this here speaker on the bottom edge which pumps out audio for your movies, etc., and frankly it's a bit tinny and poo. Yeah, quite a bit of distortion on that top volume, so I would say hook up Bluetooth headphones whatever you do. There's no headphone jack, unfortunately, which is a real shame. But yeah, the Bluetooth streaming's been okay, as long as you're not trying to do too much other stuff at the same time. More on that in the performance bit, which just happens to be right now. Hooray! So powering the Nothing Phone 3A Lite. It's not the Snapdragon 7S Gen 3, which powered the regular Nothing Phone 3A and 3A Pro. They've ripped that right out and replaced it with a MediaTek chipset instead, namely the Dimensity 7300 Pro, which isn't particularly shocking, perfectly predicted in fact, because that's the exact same chipset which powered the cheaper CMF Phone 2 Pro, another Nothing branded smartphone which is available in slightly different regions to the Phone 3A Lite. Otherwise I'd be like, what the bloody hell is the point in releasing this one? It's not too different. This Dimensity chipset may be fairly basic-ish, but you've still got 5G support, you've still got a bit of Wi-Fi 6. I've had bug roll issues with the networking the entire time I've been testing this thing. And overall, the everyday run-in is fairly smooth, although occasionally if you're playing around in the camera, this can be a wee bit juddery, and sometimes swapping between the different modes or the different sensors can take a wee while. And I've certainly found that if I'm streaming a bit of music or a podcast or whatever via Bluetooth to my headphones and I open up the camera app to take a quick snap, suddenly that Bluetooth streaming will get rather juddery indeed. However, despite all of this, the gaming chops of the Nothing Phone 3A Lite are actually pretty decent, certainly for a budget phone. The likes of Wuthering Waves are slow to load, but this memory slurping game can actually be run on the regular graphics settings with a decent enough frame rate to keep it playable. Yes, occasionally that gameplay can be about as smooth as driving on the average British B road, but all the same the frame rate manages to keep in double digits even during pretty mental, intense fighty bits. And you've got a simple cooling system stuffed in the Nothing Phone 3A Lite as well, a bit of liquid cooling as well as some graphite layers to help keep all that hot air moving along, and this does work a treat. I found that even after an hour of Wuthering Waves, it was only just getting fairly warm, certainly not to a finger burny degree. And yes, the NothingOS gaming mode might be rather minimal to say the least, but it can block notifications and calls and even record your mad skills on demand. And the battery life of the Nothing Phone 3A Lite has been proper bloody good as well. You've got a 5000 mAh capacity battery stuffed in there, and that plus the energy efficient MediaTek chipset and just general energy efficiencies in NothingOS means that you'll get hours and hours of screen on time from that, no worries. I typically ended each day with around sort of 30 to 35% battery life remaining. That's with probably around 7 hours of screen on time. You know, get a bit of camera play and all that kind of good stuff. Even if I was doing a video chat for a good hour or so, it didn't take down that battery too much at all. So fairly regular users should be able to get a full weekend of action from a single charge. And yes, playing Wuthering Waves on just the regular graphics settings, you can still expect a solid sort of 5.5 to 6 hours of gameplay on a single charge. So again, pretty solid results. Unfortunately, when it comes to recharging, not so hot. You've got 33 watt wired charging support and of course bugger all wireless charging, as it is a budget friendly blower. And hey kiddies, why don't we finish this splendid Nothing Phone 3A Lite review with a squint at the old camera tech there. And the primary shooter on the Nothing Phone 3A Lite is rather surprising. It's a 50 meg Samsung sensor, 1/1.57 inch, so pretty good size for a budget handset. And sadly there's no telephoto shooter in backup. If you tap 2 times it is just digital zoom and a not particularly swift digital zoom. And what you've got on the side is a 8 megapixel ultra wide shooter, which I believe uses the same sensor as the other 3A blowers. And the third lens sadly is a pointless macro snapper. You get in super close for a lovely low-res shot that's usually oversaturated if you keep the flash on, and just completely dark if you don't have the flash on, because you have to get so close you block all the light out. Anyway, ignoring that and sticking to the other lenses, you'll get some brighter scenes ending up, again, oversaturated at times, and HDR scenes are generally treated in that iPhone-y way. blitz in any kind of contrast with a lighter finish in darker areas, courtesy of the XDR processing. And as a consequence, what you actually see on the Phone 3a Lite's display often isn't representative of what the final photo will look like. But hey, at this price point the results are pretty decent and they should satisfy most people just fine. Portrait snaps often boast a pleasing bokeh effect and reasonably accurate skin tones, while ambient and low light pics usually turn out pretty well for a budget-friendly handset, thanks to that sizeable sensor. That is, as long as your subject doesn't shift or fidget about at all when you actually hit that shutter button. And yes, bugger all optical zoom here on the Nothing Phone 3a Lite. You can zoom in with a quick tap down there or by pinching in like so. Although that said, even at the 2x zoom level, detail is dropping pretty hard when you check out your photos on a tablet or a laptop. So you won't want to push in too much at all. And as for the Nothing Phone 3a Lite's ultra-wide snapper, well, it spunks out slightly flatter photos with duller tones. It is handy if you need to fit loads into frame, but otherwise it can mostly just be forgotten about. And when it comes to the video chops, well, if you want to shoot 4K resolution footage, you're stuck at 30 frames per second. You'll have to chuck it down to full HD resolution if you want 60 frames per second. Otherwise, if you flip to the slow motion mode, you can shoot 1080p footage at 120 frames per second. And the stabilization is smooth enough so you can walk about and shoot even when you are filming at Ultra HD res, while the picture quality is generally fine as long as the lighting isn't total trouser. The mic is a wee bit sensitive to wind, however, when you are shooting outdoors, which can be quite annoying. And last up, around the front end of the Nothing Phone 3a Lite, you've got yourself a more basic 16 megapixel selfie shooter compared with the 32 meg effort slapped in the regular Phone 3a and that 3a Pro, but it's absolutely fine for a simple bit of vlogging or video chatting. Even though the resolution does max out at full HD, either 30 or 60 frames per second, there's no 4K option. And yes, there is bugger all AI photo editing smarts built into NothingOS, just the regular stuff. But you know, if you've got Google Photos, you can always swap to the edit section there. You've got plenty of enhancement tools, stuff that can denoise and sharpen your photos, etc, etc. And there you have it, my lovelies. That in a delicious wee nutshell is the fresh new Nothing Phone 3a Lite. And certainly for the money, it ain't bad at all. You know, you got respectable performance most of the time. You got some pretty banging battery life. Camera tech's dependable enough. Yeah, it's kind of a shame though that they ripped out a lot of the stuff that made the Nothing Phone 3a so much fun, like the triple Glyph Lite and setup really helped to stand out from the crowd. And overall, I've got to say, if you've got just that little bit of extra cash, just slap it down on the Nothing Phone 3a, the regular model, instead, and shun the Lite. Otherwise, if you're on a very strict budget, you can't quite reach that Nothing Phone 3a, you know, this is a perfectly acceptable everyday handset that'll certainly do the job for most users. Anyway, that's what this saggy northern twat reckons, but what do you reckon of the Nothing Phone 3a Lite? It'd be great to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Please do poke subscribe, ding that notifications bell for more on the latest and greatest tech. Check out my Nothing Phone 3a and 3a Pro reviews for more on all that shenanigans. And have yourselves a bloody wonderful rest of the week. Cheers everybody, love you!